how to think about technology from, say, a basic science perspective versus commercialization perspective. Over to you, Barry.
Well, thanks, Vaibhav. Thank you. I am currently Director of Licensing and Business Development for Life Sciences at Dartmouth College. I went to Dartmouth as an undergraduate and then went back to Connecticut to get my PhD in pharmacology. I spent about 5 years in academia, including a faculty member in chemistry in Florida, before coming back to Connecticut to help start up first one, then another company. Small company, a biotech company, and both were sold. I stayed with the acquirer of the second company. At that point, it was called Invitrogen. It became Life Technologies and then Thermo Fisher. About 5 years ago, I joined a small venture capital firm, worked on a number of different companies, as well as worked with different universities. I've always loved the Upper Valley here in Vermont and New Hampshire. So when I found out about an opening in tech transfer a couple of years ago, I took that position, and I've been working with Dartmouth faculty to help them move their technologies from the lab to the clinic. What I've done over my career is build new organizations, build new capabilities. One of those things most recently was the building an accelerator for new biotech companies coming out of Dartmouth, and we just launched that, and it's going really well. So
now you are back at a university driving commercialization of early stage assets. Sometimes people in academics think of industry as going over to the dark side. If you're doing research in your own lab, you're publishing about these new molecular pathways, or you're identifying new technologies that can truly move us forward, then what are the dangers of staying within that bubble and not thinking about commercialization?
First of all, I am never critical of a scientist or a faculty or a student who just is in love with the idea of discovering new things, asking new questions, just their science, love their science. That's wonderful. Again, if that's what you love, that's what they should do. But I would say, however, a lot of academia or academic research, is all about grant, is based on, you need grants, right? If you want money from the NIH, you got to make the case to some extent that what you're doing is going to benefit patients. It doesn't happen automatically. It's really hard. It takes a lot of money. It takes millions of dollars for discovery, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. And sometimes it's unpredictable as well, how that happens. It's always useful to think about, I'm doing this basic work. What's the group of patients that this might impact, specifically, and not just cancer patients, for example, but maybe small cell lung cancer patients containing a certain mutation, and then you think your way backwards to what's the experiments that would be needed. It's kind of a thought experiment. What are the experiments that would be needed to go from where I am now to that particular set of patients? The commercialization, and that will come through, publishing and talking to other people about it and giving talks and so it's not inconsistent with your academic career. I've encountered some faculty who are like, I've got, here's this work I'm doing. It might have an impact on patients someday, but I'm too busy to file a patent on it. It's just, I don't care about that. I don't care about the money for myself. So patenting is all about myself. It's all about money. No, that's wrong. It's unfair, and it's selfish. Patenting discoveries can have a major impact. I'm looking right now at an article that was published in the New Hampshire Business Review, and it's called "Groundwork for COVID-19 Vaccine Laid at Dartmouth." And so there was a scientist named Jason McClellan, and he did work back around 2015, 2016, looking at a virus, or a family of viruses, and he started, trying to study their proteins, their protein structures, the spike protein, which you've heard of in particular. And he had a problem when he was doing that. He couldn't get the protein expressed, in the system without it falling apart, and because it was unstable when he tried to make it. So he engineered in a couple of mutations. He put in a couple of prolines, for those of you who might be interested, and that was stable. It was beautiful. It worked beautiful. Now that was a virus. It might have. I can't remember whether it might have had some small medical use, and even then, infection. Trying to commercialize, antivirals or infection, is difficult because, or was difficult because no one would put money into it. But he filed a patent on it with Dartmouth, and actually and NIAID, and a few other collaborators. Okay, well, fast forward to 2019. He was now at University of Texas. He had a graduate student from Dartmouth who still worked in his lab. This COVID-19 came out, and within a few days, this graduate student introduced those same mutations into the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, demonstrated that it worked, made it stable, and now that particular genetic element is part of every RNA and almost most of the protein vaccines that are out there today. So, lesson is, you never know what might be useful, and if you ever have any hope of seeing your a technology reach patients or be commercialized, talk to your tech transfer office about patenting, because if it's not patented, companies like Pfizer, like Moderna, are not going to invest the millions or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into the technology if they can't defend their intellectual property. Because Pfizer, for example, licensed that technology that Dartmouth developed, and that was one of several technologies that have gone into that vaccine. But it would not be out today if it wasn't for basic research that was carried out sometimes 5-10 years ago, patented, protected, and so on. CRISPR is another example where all kinds of very somewhat random, completely unrelated types of basic research was developed, patented, and now commercialized and eventually bringing benefit to patients. So I think it's important for academics to do what they're supposed to do, which is research and teaching, but without much distraction. You should think about how it might affect patients, and work with your technology transfer office to patent the things that should be patented.
Can you also talk about the role of technology transfer offices, which are actually part of the laws that were passed? Every university is obligated to have a technology transfer component. Why is that? And beyond patenting, what kinds of services are usually provided by tech transfer offices?
In 1980, the Congress passed what's called the Bayh-dole Act. What was going on was that lots of money was from federal funds to universities to do research, but not a lot of commercialization was going on from the research, because all the intellectual property basically belonged to the government. So, and it was hard to get the government to figure out what they would do. It was just so Bayh-dole basically said, what we're going to, we, the federal government, are going to give the institution the right to control the intellectual property, to license the intellectual property, and to share the financial rewards of those licenses with the inventors. Certain incentives as well as penalties for not commercializing or not trying to patent. You have to actually, if you don't patent something, you have to then say to the government, we don't want to patent it. It's yours to do with what you will. If our faculty member discovers and it takes an invention and that invention was funded by the federal government, the policy, the law and the policy is that the institution, Dartmouth College in our case, owns that intellectual property. So it's one of those things. Why it's relevant, I think, to your audience, Vaibhav, is that sometimes faculty, naive faculty think, well, this was my idea, my invention, so I can do with it what I want or not. And actually, that's by law. If your work was funded by the federal government, that is wrong. You do not own it. The institution owns it. And according to our policy, we are obligated to share any revenue that we get back to the inventor.
What are the services that are offered to faculty members beyond patenting?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not only our responsibility to patent, but it's also our responsibility to commercialize. In other words, and it's part of our mission as a Dartmouth's mission. Is to see that the results of the fruits of the research that go on here are shared with the world, and the way technology gets shared with the world is through commercialization. So what do? We talk to other companies. I send technologies to invest. I'm responsible for all the biotech stuff. So that's why, for example, this accelerator that I mentioned is really important, because it's a way for Dartmouth Technologies to get in front of investors and companies to get exposure. And then if someone wants that technology, then we have to work with that other party to do a license, to come up with an agreement that says, okay, for this consideration, we're not, again, the intellectual property stays with the university, but we give the licensee the right to use and to use the IP. It's almost like a rental.
Yeah, it sounds like you take care of a lot of the paperwork and all of the things that go behind the scenes. Can you also talk about, so first of all, like, most of the research at universities is publicly funded. So if NIH is funding a grant, that money is actually originating from the taxpayer. So
Right.
Do you think there's a moral question here, where if the taxpayer is funding your research and your stay at the university, then maybe you're morally obligated to share the fruits of your research with the taxpayer? And the best way to do that is to turn your research into a product that then, as a taxpayer, we can go and we can access in the market.
Right. Yes. I mean, I think that's sort of the overall goal of the Bayh-dole Act was to see that these technological advances reached the people that are paying for it, and the point is that it takes money to develop a product, especially a biotech product.
I think we understand the money portion, but I think if somebody is working in a lab on early stage research, and then you look at something which is clinically developed, I think there's a gap in knowledge, right? So can you talk about, so it's not that companies only invest money or VCs only invest money. There is a lot of expertise that is needed. No, so can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was going to say that. I think that's the sometimes I see it, there are different types of inventors, okay, or they come from different disciplines. So for example, and I've seen it here at Dartmouth, where we have a very strong engineering department, for example, and we also have a medical school. In an engineering department, for certain types of engineering technologies, it's possible for for the faculty or the inventor to actually start up and run their company and commercialize that company. It's not that, it doesn't require a huge amount of capital, and there's been enough ways of doing, it's not that specialized, a skill to commercialize a widget or a new software or something like that. developing a new drug is enormously complicated, enormously expensive, and requires people who've done it before. So I think that's the other thing, is that faculty here and other places sometimes don't want to be involved in the patenting or the commercialization because they don't have the expertise or the time. I've had faculty tell me, you know what, I don't want to patent this because I just don't have the time to run my own company. And I'm like, no, you're not going to run. There's no way you're going to run your own company. No one would want you to run your own company. We want you to do research in the lab. And it's our job to, I mentioned the investors and so forth, but another and maybe even harder thing to do is to find experienced people to take the technology and help them develop a drug. So you're absolutely right. That is a big gap at universities. And again, the only way to do that is, you have to build that network of people who are aware of what's going on at the university and are prepared or are interested in taking that and moving it forward. Dartmouth is fortunate to have a very strong and dedicated alumni network. And so again, using the accelerator as an example, I've been working with others to put together almost like a file of people, mentors and potential entrepreneurs, mostly Dartmouth grads, and matching them with teams in the accelerator to talk to them, to help them, and maybe someday to run the company. But it's certainly possible for an academic to move over time into a biotech company. In fact, what most VCs like to see is if you're a faculty member and you've got a postdoc in the lab who's been really involved, or even a graduate student really involved in the development of that technology, they love it when that postdoc or graduate student comes into the company. And they'll also usually have the faculty as an advisor.
Okay, so that's it.